Okay, so we're going to get started. So thank you all for coming to the community webinar, diving into SOS1 mental health and cognition symptoms. I want to take a moment to take this opportunity to thank everyone that has participated in our study and those that are actively helping us gather data to further our understanding of rhosopathies. I also want to take a moment that we are still to take a moment to say that we are still currently recruiting participants, children with Noonan syndrome, specifically the SOS1 mutation. We know that the SOS1 mutation is rare, so while we do want to share a lot of findings and insights, we do need more data from that. Also wanted to share that all the travel costs are covered by Stanford, and you will get a free neuropsychological evaluation. So if you're interested or you know anyone that's interested, we urge you to sign up, and Nomi will drop the link in the chat shortly. Tamar, do you have anything else to add about the recruitment?
Yeah, I'm gonna add that today we're gonna show you all the data that we have from children with SOS1, and we're gonna talk about it. But you'll see through my talk that any help, we will welcome any help in recruiting more children, so we have more robust results and can give more insights.
Here are some housekeeping notes. So the event will be recorded. There will be a time at the end for an open discussion and Q&A, and this is where I will stop the recording. We also want to be mindful of your time, so we do have 45 minutes, and we're going to try to keep it to just that. And just want to remind everyone that this is a community event, so we want to hear from you, and we want you to take this opportunity to ask questions and connect with one another. So here's the agenda for today. So first, we're going to start with some introductions, some findings from the lab, and then we will move on to the Q&A section. So I'm going to pass it on to Tamar, who is our speaker and our principal investigator at the lab.
Thank you so very much, Dea. And I just want to kind of like give a shout out to Dea that did all the analysis behind the slides that you're going to see. It's really data that we just finished collecting. So with that being said, it's also data that we have not published. So you get a first pick into what we're seeing. Um, since it's not published, so we kind of like think about it as something that is preliminary and we still need to think about and process. So like this is the way I want you to think about what I'm going to present. And next slide. A little bit about our lab. Our lab is at Stanford, and it's dedicated to researching the effects of a genetic on the brain development, with the overall aim to improve children's mental health and development. The project that we are currently focusing on, the first project is a project that's related to this webinar, and we are interested in the brain development of children with rhosopathies, specifically focusing on Noonan syndrome, and specifically focusing in the genetics of Noonan syndrome, hence children with PTPN11, SOS1, and other more rare conditions that cause Noonan syndrome. We also have a project that focuses on NF1, which is another rhosopathy. Kind of like thinking about similar things about the brain development and function. We're also interested in the background genetic and what, except from the specific genetic mutation, what helps us predict how the child will develop. And lastly, and also relevant to the webinar today, we are passionate about improving care through community engagement. So this is one of the events, and we have many other webinars that are recorded on our website. And we also have a project that is going on, engaging the community and asking what is important to study. Next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna dive now to SOS1. I promise there's gonna be time at the end for questions, and I can always go back to the slides. Currently, we're not welcoming questions because we're recording and we want to keep your identity confidential, so we can put it on the website. But I will be happy to go back and answer any question that comes up. Next slide. Um, I wanted to frame what the results that I'm gonna show today by showing you that we study 41 children with 41 children with who are typically developing, 74 children with Noonan syndrome with the mutation of PTPN11, and 14 children with SOS1. So this is kind of like, again, calling to, this is why we're doing so much effort to increase the numbers of children that we see with SOS1, so we can have better data and we can have better information to give back. The average age of the children of the data that you see was collected from children around the age of 10. You can see that we had roughly equal numbers of females and males, except from the group of SOS1 that we had more females, and we're hoping to increase the number of boys in our study. Next slide. So I'm going to talk today about three main results. The first one that you see here is behavioral results. This is everything that you can see in the child behavior. The next cluster of results that I'm going to show are cognitive results. This is when we test the child for different abilities, for example, reading skills or attention. And lastly, I'm just going to touch on findings that we have from brain imaging that compare children with PTPN11, the mutation that caused Noonan syndrome in 50%, to children with SOS1, showing different effect on the brain. So to start with, I'm just going to take a moment to see if I can just have let's use that maybe. Can you see my Odette, can you see my
I don't
no?
know.
Okay.
So,
Um I just wanna be able. Okay. Okay. I'll try to be my to do my best here. So on the left side, what we tested here is the social communication abilities. And the social communication means that the ability of the child to conduct social communication, to keep friendships, to understand social cues. This is a collective a, a measurement of all the things that I mentioned. And as you can see, and the higher scores that you see are higher effect, hence more difficulties. And what's very clear from this table that typically developing children are showing these skills in average percent. But children with PTPN11 have some difficulties in social communication, but children with SOS1 have, in our sample, which is small again, they show equivalent and might be higher difficulties in social communication. So this is the first finding that I want to emphasize. And many of you asking the questions about that, so we'll definitely talk about that even more. The other finding that we want to show is checking ADHD symptoms, difficulties with paying attention in class, being hyperactive in class, difficulties with impulsivity. Again, this is a composite score, meaning that I'm not talking about each symptoms, but I'm talking in general. And you can see that compared to typically developing children with PTPN11, but also children with SOS1 have expressed difficulties in those symptoms. I want to address these like lines above. This is when we apply statistical testing, and you can see that for social communication, there's a statistically significant difference. But for the ADHD symptoms, there isn't. The reason for that, from what we see from the data, is because we need more children in order to prove that it's statistically significant. Next slide. Now I'm switching to the second cluster of results, and that's going to be a little bit more expanded, that of cognitive testing. I want to explain these two measures. We have expressive language and receptive language. If we put it really simply, the expressive language is the ability of the child to express themselves verbally. And receptive language is the ability to understand. And here you can see that for compared to a receptive language that is the score is 100 and this is average, the expressive language in children with SOS1 is slightly weaker, and weaker as children with PTPN11, but significantly lower than typically developing children. So we see some signs for difficulties with expressive language. Next slide. Again, we're testing here attention on the left side, and attention and executive function on the right side. Attention can be thought about as the ability to keep your, let's say if we think about a class setting, it's the ability of the child to sustain the attention um, um, for more than 5, 10, 20 minutes that require to listen. And in this testing, you can see that we see difficulties with attention in both group, PTPN11 and SOS1. The other test, it tests attention and executive function. And we also see some weaknesses here. Executive function are the abilities to plan ahead, to check your work, to plan your actions. So we see weaknesses that are similar to children with PTPN11. And the reason that I'm saying all the time similar to children with PTPN11, because PTPN11 is the most common mutation that causes Noonan syndrome, and most of the data up to date was collected from children with PTPN11. Next slide. In those measurements that on the left side, we see processing speed, and we can simply think about it like how fast the child can process information, react, and again, not significant, but we do see some weaknesses in processing speed in children with SOS1, but it seems that there's something they're kind of like in the middle. They're not as affected as children with PTPN11. And similar story for working memory. Working memory is the capacity to keep something in your mind. For example, when you want to do a simple calculation, 3 plus 3 double 2. So you need to to keep the number 6 in your mind before you can double it by 2. So this is the ability to keep some information in our mind and being able to manipulate it. So as you can see, for children with SOS1, it seems that they function as well as typically developing children, so they're not that affected under our hands, with the data that we collected. Next slide. And lastly, I want to show you data from brain studies. So I will take a moment to explain what we're seeing and then go through the results. In our brain, we have regions that are called cortical regions. They are more kind of like the outer layer of our brain. But we also have regions that called subcortical regions, and this is what you see in this picture, subcortical regions. And specifically for Noonan syndrome, we know that there's a significant effect, and the effect is shown in blue. There's a significant effect on the volume of this structure, and specifically structures that called striatum, and they're responsible for example, they will be implicated in inhibiting. For example, I see something across the street, or my ball kind of like roll into the street, and I need to inhibit my my tendency to run after the ball. So we know that this capacity is affected in Noonan syndrome. And also we know that the brain region that is implicated in such behaviors is affected and is smaller. And what we asked here in this study, this is a study that is already published, we asked whether children with SOS1 whether their brain is also affected. So as you can see, there's a dark blue for the PTPN11 and a lighter blue for the SOS1, which means that we find an effect, but is not as big. So the children with SOS1 have effects that related to Noonan syndrome on the brain, but for this region, they're not as big as we see in PTP and 11. So there's an attenuated effect. Next slide. So here I'm going to use one of the questions that were asked to show you another set of finding that was already published. So the question was, can these findings help with IEP processes, and how do I best help education system accommodate a Noonan's child in school? So I want to say IEP, just for if anyone is not familiar with the term, is individualized education plan. And the question is asking whether we can use all these findings that I show you today to advocate for such a plan if the child needs that. So I want to show you a paper that we published, I think now still last year, right? We're almost in 2025. And this is a paper that I'm going to explain what we found, but the reason I'm showing it is because this is a paper that really simply goes through all the neurodevelopmental and psychiatric issues that are associated with children with Noonan syndrome. And I encourage you to use it as a tool to advocate at school, because many times in rare conditions, it's really difficult for the school to even capture what Noonan is, or what is a child with SOS1, what are the effects. So this study comes to provide robust information about the possible effects and what should if someone tests the child, what should they focus on in the testing. So I'm gonna just present very few of the results. Next slide. So what we did is we looked on attention and executive function. This is I already showed you before. We looked at social skills, at the ability of the child to communicate and conduct social relationship, and we also looked at aggression. So this is what I mean when I say we cover these three main domains that affect children in the age of elementary school. Just a moment, I'm closing the door. Sorry about that. And next slide. So here I'm just showing one result, and we are happy to share the full paper with you. So I'm showing you children with Noonan syndrome. This group is combined of children with PTPN11 and children with SOS1. And we looked at different domain of social cognition. I'm just going to mention three of them for the kind of that you can get a taste of what it is. So for example, awareness will be how aware is the child to social cues or to rejection. Um, um, this is an example, and you see very clearly that the children with Noonan syndrome in red are presenting with much more issues with social awareness. And you can, if you see this reference line, the dashed line, anyone that is above this line, it means that there's clinically significant level of symptoms. And you can see that almost half of the children with Noonan syndrome do present with these issues. And in contrast, you can see that we have a measure of motivation, the motivation to have friends, the motivation to have social interactions. And you can see that although it's a little bit affected, but not significantly so, we think that the children are very motivated. But there's other difficulties like being aware of social interactions, of tendency to have some mannerism of repetitive movements and other areas that makes it difficult for the child to sustain social relationship. Next slide. And last but not least, to that specific question about IEP and how to advocate for your child at school. So we have a webinar that we did in 23, and our guest that you can see in the middle, Miss Tahar Gershon, she is just phenomenal. She's an educator that has a lot of experience in working with children with different conditions and how to advocate in the school system. So I highly recommend to check that out if this is something that you are curious about or interested in.
Thank you, Tamar, for sharing the results, both from our preliminary data and our published studies. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A section. So I wanted to thank everyone for submitting their questions beforehand. We will do our best to get through all of them, but also at the end, there will be some time to ask questions. So the first question is, how does SOS affect my child's mental health?
So I think we kind of like this is most of the data that we are we're showing, and if I think about big picture, I think that currently with the data that we have and in younger children, we see two domains that are we think there's an effect. One of them going to be the social communication, as I mentioned several times in my talk, and the second one going to be attention and ADHD symptoms that and when I'm saying that, I want to say that what I'm showing you is collective data from a group. So it doesn't mean that if a child has SOS1, this is what they're gonna present with. The way to think about it is what are the sensitivities or the things that I should pay attention to when I have a child with Noonan syndrome. So it's not necessarily that every child will present with everything. So it's something that is very important to remember. In terms of other mental health condition like mood symptoms or more severe, I think we don't have enough data to say. So this is a kind of to be continued and keep looking at these children as they develop.
Next question. Are there any findings that indicate a difficulty in regulating emotions in SOS1?
This is a wonderful question, and what so w I'm going to answer this question about Noonan syndrome in general because this is what we looked at, and we just submitted a paper that showed um, significant difficulties with regulating emotion in children with Noonan syndrome. We have not analyzed the data to look specifically at SOS1, but given the fact that there's elevated symptoms of social communication and ADHD, usually ability to regulate emotion kind of like sits under these two behaviors. So I would say that most likely there's going to be an elevated and difficulties in regulating emotions. If I just want to repeat it from a different angle, just to be clear, the fact that we see that there's ADHD, elevated ADHD, and elevated social communication issues gives us a strong indication that underneath it there's issues with regulating emotions. And the way we think about it is we call it also irritability. It's kind of like being very, very reactive to frustration. This is something that we do see and think it's related to Noonan syndrome.
Does SOS1 mutation affect learning?
So from the data I showed you, there's some effect on learning. There's some effect on attention. There's some effect on executive function, but there's I would say that the effects are very they're not severe in the testing that we have, meaning that these children definitely can learn and progress in the school year. They might be need for individual education plans or 504 that support specific weaknesses. But in other aspects, for example, the studies that test IQ, which component of IQ I showed you, show that children with SOS1 function in a mean level means that they do not have significant effect on their cognition. So to summarize that, I would say yes, it affects learning, but it can affect specific domains in learning that can be supported by the educational system.
Next question. Are there areas we should be most watchful or concerned? Is there testing we should do to figure out concerns or anything? With SOS1, what kind of milestone or possible mental delays are possible?
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. These children needs to be under more watchful environment. And I would kind of like divide it to, let's say, 0 to 6. The the physician or the what needs to be kind of like monitored is at the pediatrician, and then if there's any concerns with developmental peds or occupational therapy, is to see that the development is going through the expected milestone in terms of walking, toilet training, all the milestones that the child needs to meet in those years. And I did not talk about that today, and we honestly don't have a lot of data about that today. Um, what I was talking about is the elementary school years, and there I would be very watchful how well the child acquires reading and writing, whether the teacher has any concerns about their attention, whether there's significant social issues. For example, is the child being bullied or laughed at, or seems to not really understand what's going on recess? So these are the type of questions and kind of like what I would, for example, as a mom, would bring up in the conversation with the teacher, kind of like priming her also to think about it. And if any concerns do come up, the testing that we talk about is uh, our psychodidactic evaluation that usually uh, you're entitled to have through the school system. And I'm not going to dive more into that, but I'm going to direct you again to a webinar that really dives into that and talk about this process.
We're going to go through one more question before we open the floor up. What age is the most appropriate to reach a specialist to help our kids better?
So I would say it's not about the age, it's about what when you feel that there's effect on the development, or the development is not as expected. So I think I covered the younger age and the middle school, the elementary school, but I will talk a little bit about high school. So in high school, we do see more emergence of anxiety, depression, a tendency to have there can be more difficulties following up at school, failing subjects. So I would say that when there's development is very, very dynamic process, so it's hard for me to say which age. I would say that it's when you start to see that the child is struggling. This is when I would reach out to a specialist to assess that. And many times I would, it wouldn't be my first stop. It would be talking with the pediatrician about it, talking with the teacher about it, and start thinking like whether they're concerned too, and if yes, what are the next steps? And then there's a specialist to go to.
Okay, now we're going to open it up for people at the webinar to ask any specific questions. I will be stopping